now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. Welcome to your Money Show tonight. I'm Stephen Grootes. Well, just a reminder of the interconnectedness of things, and also, I suspect, of how difficult we as South Africa are going to find it to navigate the, I suppose, growing geopolitical tension between the US and China. Let me explain what I mean. You would have heard in the business reports today how it is that Naspers and Prosus, their shares ending the day, Naspers down over 10%, Prosus down over 8%, simply because the United States Defense Department today designated that Tencent is working with the Chinese military. Now, technically, nothing really follows from this, but politically, many things could follow from this. And it's just a reminder of how difficult the geopolitical situation is, that the JSE is affected by a decision made, I presume, in Washington about something that is happening in Beijing. And we'll have more, of course, on this through the Money Show tonight. But it just is a reminder of how complicated life is going to be. And I'm well aware, of course, that the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administrations may well have different attitudes towards China. This could all change. The question, of course, and I think this is going to be a question around Trump for many months, is around change in which direction. Things could go in so many different directions. You actually have no idea what is going to happen. And I think that is really the biggest issue that we're going to face through 2025. I spent some time shopping in shopping malls over the December period. And the reason I didn't tell you about it until now was because I needed so much time to recover. There were so many people. I remember one place I had a meeting in Rosebank at lunchtime. Just trying to find a parking space was unbelievable. It was literally incredible what was going on. And I was trying to sort of marry my experience, Rosebank, Sandton, one or two other places in Joburg, with what seems to be happening at the Fourways Mall. Moneyweb got a couple of reports about the situation at the Fourways Mall and the problems they're having. It does seem, and certainly when I've been there in the last few months, not over the Christmas period, but before that, didn't seem to be full at all. And I'm talking about shops. In other words, not all of the shops were let. At the same time, we keep being told everyone's moving to online shopping. One of the big stories last year, of course, was about Temu, was about Shein, all of that. Except that today, there was another company that made the point that they believe that actually online, retail shopping, physical shopping, going to the shops and feeling something and seeing it for yourself, experiencing it for yourself, really matters. I found that really interesting. Home Choice saying today that in fact their research suggests, and the research they've been looking at suggests that there's a much better, I suppose, transition rate. In other words, you can go online and look at something, but once you've seen it, touched it, sort of felt it, if you like, seen it in real life, you're much more likely to buy it. And that I found really interesting. And I think there's tension around what is going to happen online, what is going to happen in terms of physical stores is really interesting. And that's separate in a way from a different conversation, which is around shopping malls. I've got to the point now where, if it's all about parking for me. If I can get to it and park easily, I'll go there, even if I have to drive further. I know some people who will just go to where it's free to park simply because they just can't be asked to manage the parking system. And I know that there are parking apps here and there, and I've got those too. They're just making the point they don't feel they should have to pay for parking. And of course, paying for parking is a real bugbear. And so they'll go somewhere else. And that means a smaller shopping centre. Often they seem to be doing a little better than the bigger shopping centres. And then I wonder if you've had a problem with this today. I'd be very interested if you run maybe a small business. I got this email from a small business owner. They suggest they received several payments over the course of a year from clients overseas. These are all reported to SARS and the Reserve Bank, etc. And then when they received an inward transfer, so they received a payment from overseas at the beginning of the year last week, they got a Bidvest mandate form for completion. This happens at the start of the year. They completed it as normal, but it was rejected for no reason. They then went back to the bank and they said, they emailed who they're supposed to email, and they basically called who they're supposed to call, and they got a message saying, we're reviewing our 2025 mandate form. This has led to an increased volume of inquiries. So the question I'm trying to get to is this happening to other smaller companies as well? Is there something to do with the mandate form? I presume not just Bidvest, but other banks as well, that somewhere with that interface with the Reserve Bank, smaller companies are finding it difficult to renew what they need to renew. And if that is affecting you, please, I'd like to hear from you. If you had a successful experience, please, I'd like to hear from you too. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. I realize it's January. In other words, that time of the year when you come back and you really just have no money. I mean, I think if you run a canteen in a workplace, you probably find everyone's still bringing sandwiches from home because it's just too expensive to buy lunch at the moment. And maybe running a coffee shop's a little difficult as well. Well, you may want to pay special attention to personal finance. Warren Ingram with you from 7:30 this evening. Good to have you along. Welcome to The Money Show, 13 after 6.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, much of the action on the JSE today a result of what happened in the US relating to its relationship with China. Shares in Naspers and Prosus down by around 9%, so Naspers down by over 10% on the JSE today. The US Defense Department added the name of Tencent to a list of companies it says are working with the Chinese military. Tencent and at least one of the other companies that were added as well say the decision has been a mistake. Dr Martyn Davies is a former member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on China. He's an expert on the situation there. Martin, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. Tencent, I mean, primarily a social media company. It runs Weibo. It's a massive commercial and social media platform. Why would the US Defense Department now claim it's working with the Chinese military?
Good evening, Stephen. It's a bit, we have to look at this wider. I mean, the Tencent has attracted a great deal of the news for obvious reasons, a South African connection as well. But also on the list is Costco. Costco was named yesterday. Costco is the world's largest shipping company, roughly about 1,500 vessels. This is not just a focus on what was traditionally thought to be just military or defense-related technologies. This is a wider, rapidly increasing in momentum decoupling of the U.S. economy from the Chinese. And I think the pending Trump administration already is getting into gear. And this is going to be, it's very clear that in the next months or weeks, months and years ahead, there'll be a concerted effort to reduce the influence of Chinese companies globally. And I think we're going to see this either word again, with decoupling effectively of Chinese companies because of U.S. policy trying to reduce, we say, their footprint and presence globally. Tencent is merely one company. We saw a few months ago, even under the Biden administration's approach with the likes of TikTok. These are seen as to be, it's not just a defense-related, it's a broader concerted anti-China effort that will start to come through very quickly, and this is a case in point.
Martin, I'm going to ask you just to speak as loudly as you can, please. It's not a great line where you are. Arguably, China and the United States, up until the pandemic, were becoming closer and closer. Never in human history has there been so much trade between two nation states. These are the two. I mean, the amount of sort of trade through the Pacific is incredible. At the same time, you had many people from China coming into the U.S. to study, to live. You had many people from the U.S. going to China to conduct business. You're talking about the reversal of one of the defining trends of before 2019, of the last sort of 20, 30 years. Certainly, I suppose, from the mid-1980s.
Certainly. The mega trend here, Stephen, as you allude to, is the following, is that I think there's a growing consensus in the U.S. that Obama got it wrong vis-a-vis China. The government was seen, the Obama administration seemed to be too close to China, too engaging, to perhaps too many concessions, and to embracing of free trade vis-a-vis China. And many economies, countries, we could talk about South Africa sometimes, could perhaps be accused of the same thing. There's been under the Biden administration, one of the few things that the Democrats and Republicans actually agreed upon was this growing resistance, putting it politely, towards rising the geoeconomic threat posed by China globally, which was threatening in their mind U.S. established vested interests. With Trump coming in, that feeling has clearly, become significantly more focused, more determined. Hence, almost weekly, we're seeing more companies, Chinese companies, being targeted, being listed, or blacklisted rather, by the Department of Defense, amongst other U.S. government agencies, for possible sanctions, reprisals, whatever it may be. So I think there's a whole rethink, so the whole geopolitical play, the whole rethink about, well, countries change with trade, with foreign multinationals, with as you say, with students studying abroad, with people-to-people networks. We start to change, societies from a typical Western view, ones that perhaps may be too conservative, too political, too ideological, too communist, effectively, and will become, quote, more like us, more market-orientated. And that, I think, was a very naive view. And clearly, as China has progressed economically, the expectation that it would politically over years, and the perception, at least, that Washington, D.C. these days, amongst other countries, is China's become the competitive forces coming from China are no longer manageable, and there needs to be a pushback against this influence. And that's exactly what's happening. We're seeing the same in Europe, albeit less, less forceful. But we're seeing this out of the U.S., and I think we'll start to see the ramifications of this in other parts of the world, think Africa, going forward as well.
Well, I mean, this, for us, is going to be a major issue coming in the year in which we're the chair of the G20. And I mean, for the Ramaphosa administration, they're going to have to dance around this. They're going to have to manage this very, very carefully. And Trump is someone, maybe unlike Obama, unlike Biden, who may say, you're either with us or against us, pick one.
I think so. When the perception is countries seen as being potentially too pro-Beijing, one that countries, it's a typical U.S. traditional approach, you're either with us or against us on this one. And countries seem to be too aligned with the Chinese. There could be certainly retaliatory action, let's put it that way. And it's something which, we remember, we've been the biggest, the smallest letter in BRICS, but as I've always said before, the most proactive member or letter within the BRICS, BRICS acronym. Clearly, the biggest letter is China, and sort of the relation, the rhetoric, and whatnot with China. And we see this playing out. We see the U.S. interest in Angola, Zambia, the rehabilitation of the Levita line, but China responding in terms of East Africa. Biden in Kenya hosting the Kenyan president not too long ago. So these are this contestation is playing out in sub-Saharan Africa, a bit to the north of us, but sort of we've avoided it to South Africa so far. But I think this is coming, and I think the Trump administration is less less patient about understanding issues as it is about acting on the way as is perceived its interest. Whether that is, and that's certainly something which, as you say, needs to be well considered and managed from other recipient countries.
Dr. Martyn Davies, thank you very much indeed. Former member of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on China, an expert on the situation there. Lots to look at, of course, in that relationship between the US and China, and our relationship with China, which is about people, it's about finance, it's about ownership, it's about many, many things.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the shockwave of yesterday's decision by ArcelorMittal to shut down its long steel mill in Newcastle still reverberating around the steel industry, I think, today. It's not just that 3,500 jobs are going, and that's a major factor in this, but also the longer-term trends. Chinese steel producers undercutting our producers. A global demand is weak. There's competition here at home, sort of. Scrap metal dealers are producing steel without having to use iron ore. That's the claim. Elias Monache is the president of the Steel and Engineering and the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of South Africa, SEFSA. Elias, good evening, and thank you very much indeed for your time. Do you think this closure of this plant by Arcelor was inevitable? I mean, is there any way that it could have been stopped? Were the long-term trends just too strong?
Good evening, Stephen, to you and to the listeners. I think quite rightly so, the closure of ArcelorMittal both here in Gauteng and KZN and Newcastle can be avoided depending on various factors. And those factors then require state intervention, particularly state government, Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, because if indeed you want them to deal with the question of steel, you need then to look at this issue within a context of a steel policy. And the reason why I'm raising that issue, Stephen, is because firstly, you need then to understand the configuration of the entire steel industry, because at times people, when they talk about metal, they think only of the 3,500 is a bigger picture, because is a primary steel producer, which basically means, in a simple term, they basically then convert iron ore into steel. And then when you then do that thing, the process of doing that thing, it then requires what's called a blast furnace as opposed to electrical furnace. So the reason why I'm differentiating the two, it then gives you a different supply chain in terms of what is then required and done in different places within the production process. Now, if I then close down metal, it basically impacts on the entire supply chain, which deals with the different fabricators of steel that because they've converted steel into various long products, you can then use it for different applications. Whether you supply mining products, you supply the energy sector, you then supply the automotive, you supply various other subsectors. So in the main, I'm then saying to you, if we then look at the entire supply chain, the impact is bigger than the 3,500 jobs.
Sure. I understand that. I mean, according to from what ArcelorMittal have said, they had meetings. Meetings were set up with the DTIC, and the minister didn't pitch. I mean, that's surely a problem.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that need to be looked at. Firstly, this thing is something that started even before last year. When I'm saying last year, so that we can then differentiate the 6th and the 7th administration. When Patel was still a Minister of Trade and Industry, I think Metal raised a range of issues that need to be considered, from the logistics to energy to various other things that IDC have done in terms of supplying or funding what is called the electrical furnaces, the smaller mills, at the value of 14 billion rand. I think with the intention of competing with metal. And then I think the two, they cannot then even compete, because the product process is not the same in terms of manufacturing of steel, from the converting from scrap to different types of steel and to iron ore to steel. The two products are not the same in terms of both quality and various application that you then utilize this thing. And that's the reason why you then look at the steel that is used for building bridges, buildings and so forth. It comes from a particular process so that the buildings cannot then fall and all those things. So the reason why I'm raising that point is because let's look at Newcastle. Newcastle on its own, if you shut down the entire, it basically means the entire town is going to be a ghost town.
Yeah.
Because we are then talking about more than 200,000 people that will be affected in Newcastle. So it then requires a different set of intervention from state to say, how then do we deal with Newcastle?
So I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what would that we're going to run out of time, but what would that intervention be? If it is true that this is all about being undercut by Chinese producers and weak steel demand globally, you can't fight gravity.
No, I'm saying that the different things. That's what I'm saying is important and to understand these issues. Remember, in Newcastle, there's also a conversion of iron ore that takes place at that site. So you need then to understand that there is an element of that conversion that takes place from iron ore to steel. So it then requires a different set of these things. And hence I'm saying you need then to look at the entire steel policy, not only in one segment, because part of the problem is that when ISCO, before Metal, when it was still ISCO, the mineral rights were then split into two. One, ISCO then had something like 26% of iron ore that is used for beneficiation for encouraging locals in terms of buying steel to be cheaper, and then the rest was then given to Kumba. Now, over the years, Metal then lost the 26% when the license was then renewed, even before it was then commercialized from ISCO to Metal. So in the main, I'm saying to you, you cannot then have a steel policy without iron ore. That's the crack of the matter. Secondly, if you then deal with the steel policy, you need then to deal with the logistics in terms of the movement of iron ore from Sheshen to Vanderbilt or Vereeniging or Newcastle, so that it then means your cost of moving your iron ore to be beneficiated locally, it must be more favorable than the Chinese buying iron ore from Sheshen, landed the same iron ore cheaper than Kumba or cheaper than Metal across the road. So those are some of the issues, because you need them to deal with the import parity pricing. So these are the issues that I'm saying it need them to be addressed from a policy point of view. Now that's where government then comes in terms of harmonization of the policy. How then do you deal with the entire supply chain? How then do you deal with beneficiation? How do you deal with all those? That's the reason why DTIC plays a critical role. And then secondary, then the Department of Mineral Resources to play their role in terms of addressing these matters.
Ilyas Monachep, thank you. All we have time for, I'm afraid. Still an Engineering Industries Federation of South Africa president.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Viv Govender, portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Viv, good evening. Obviously, Prosus, Naspers and Tencent is the big story.
Yes. Apparently, the U.S. has designated Tencent as a Chinese military company. For those that don't know, the U.S. has been, attacking the Chinese tech sector for the last couple of years, preventing things like the export of chips and the machines used to make chips, preventing U.S. citizens from working on certain AI technologies in China, all for these Chinese companies. And I think this is just a step up in this particular, bit of aggression for the U.S. to China. The Chinese have responded, by the way. They have, for instance, exported sort of materials to out of the country, etc. But the U.S. definitely has the upper hand here because they have the access to the really high-end tech that the Chinese don't at the moment.
Pick n Pay and Boxer, both very strong performances today. Also, Boxer yesterday, I noticed. And obviously, I think people are feeling quite optimistic about, Boxer, they've always been optimistic, but optimistic about Pick n Pay as well after that unbundling last year.
Look, I mean, Pick n Pay has had a bit of a run recently, and it's really gone up quite nicely. It must be, however, noted that over the last 5 years, from the peak it had a few years ago, till now, the stock price is still down significantly, even after the latest rally. And in terms of its market capitalization, comparing it to a company like Shoprite, the Shoprite is about 8 times larger almost than Pick n Pay is, 7 times larger than Pick n Pay. And that is due to the fact that it's been able to extract more efficiencies out of its system than Pick n Pay has. And I do wonder, going into the future, I for one am very I strongly believe, rather, that the next 5 to 10 years we're going to see a huge shift in how the retail sector works. We talked about China recently, and the Chinese, for instance, right now are using drones to deliver, groceries to people. And I think that technology, once matures, will come to South Africa as well. I don't know how Pick n Pay is going to be able to handle such a changing retail environment.
And then the situation around NVIDIA, they've had an update, new chips. Obviously, that's still going to be one of the big stocks to watch this year.
Oh, yeah, well, certainly. NVIDIA is by far one of the best public companies in terms of, if you just look at the pure size of the company over the last few years, it's actually the most valuable company in the world on most days, and that's been driven by one person, Jensen Huang, and he gave a presentation about NVIDIA yesterday. The market hasn't reacted too positively to it. Its share price is down about 5% today, but it did come out with some incredible developments for the company. I think, of course, the AI chips is showing, for instance, a wafer that had, a bunch of chips on it. Just the way they make these chips is like they put them on this massive wafer. And he basically talked about the fact that one wafer has the ability to basically handle the entire bandwidth of the internet. Not just one part of it, the entire internet on one chip. It was incredible. Or one wafer, rather. But yeah, NVIDIA has done incredibly well. It's a multi-trillion-dollar company, about $3.5 trillion, the most valuable company in the world, like I said. And I do think that they need to basically continue to do that. They don't have the advantage of an Apple or a Microsoft where they can rest on their laurels and just basically work off a network effect. They have to literally produce the best stuff every time in order to make that valuation real.
Viv Govender, thank you. Portfolio manager at Rand Swiss.
The Money Show.
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Well, a series of comments from the Eskom chair, Mteto Nyati, in the Utilities Annual Report that the 109 billion rand owed to Eskom by councils could delay the full unbundling of the distribution unit. Eskom, as you know, has been broken into three parts: generation, distribution and transmission divisions. You can imagine what happens if councils owe one of those divisions a huge amount of money. Matthew Cruz is an energy expert on the line now. Matthew, good evening. Councils owe Eskom a fortune, and I would presume that the unit of Eskom that would have to get that money simply wouldn't be viable if councils don't pay their bills.
Yes, that's 100% correct. It's unfortunate that we've had the now successful unbundling of transmission. So that's the transmitting of thousands of kilometers across the country. That division is now successfully unbundled. But distribution is now kind of stuck, and they're still connected to the Eskom whole with generation in the bundle still. And it is unfortunate, as you say, that at the current status, if they had to unbundle distribution, it would actually become an immediate not going concern. It wouldn't be a going concern, meaning that it wouldn't be viable and wouldn't be able to pay its staff because of the amount of municipal debt that seems to be increasing. And we know it's increasing because in March, at the end of March in 2024, they had, Eskom was owed 74.4 billion, and now the latest amount has increased now 35 billion more from the latest figure that we have in January of 109 billion that's still owed. And this is despite efforts from the government really trying to help the municipalities to get out of this kind of debt spiral that they're in. And they actually offered for these municipalities to become debt-free to Eskom over 3 years if they complied to stringent compliance measures of financial judiciary or financial, being able to collect correctly and give to Eskom what is owed to them correctly. And thankfully, this has been taking place with the municipalities, where there's now 77% of the municipalities are actually complying to this debt relief program. So there is light on the horizon regarding this.
I mean, you say there's light on the horizon, Matthew, because I was going to ask, I mean, this has been going on for so long that maybe we just need, and if you look at the dysfunction, that the collection rate in municipalities is so low, they're just not getting the money that's owed to them. I made a couple of comments yesterday about the state of Joburg, for example, at the moment. That maybe we just need to accept that this money's not going to come back. And in fact, it's going to have to come from the taxpayer through government is the only way to manage this. Because at some point, we're just going to have to start again. And I hate to be this person, but, I mean, don't we just have to accept it?
Yes, that is correct. And starting again is part of the light that's on the horizon. So just to kind of qualify what I was saying, in March, there was only compliance of 55% of the municipalities to this program, and it's gone up now to 76% by August. So that shows that there's a trend that the municipalities are becoming more compliant. And for those that aren't able to be compliant and have then the money, instead of getting paid from them to Eskom, it coming from National Treasury, as you're saying, the taxpayer is ultimately paying. For them to, for those that don't comply to this, what's going to happen is that their rights to distribute, the municipalities currently own the distribution infrastructure of the cables and the substations. That will get taken away and will be assigned to either Eskom, so all of those customers will become Eskom direct customers, or it will get assigned, more excitingly, to a private distributor that we haven't seen really implemented in South Africa as yet, but it's going to become more of a trend. And so those private distributors will be they'll have the resources to actually go and collect correctly from all the electricity users, and also root out electricity theft, and then also provide the money upwards to Eskom as it should be. And that will then start going towards then a more efficient and correctly operated energy system in South Africa.
And of course, a for-profit company will have no option but to make sure it gets the money to increase the collection rate. There are all sorts of problems here. I mean, we've seen government going on campaign after campaign. The ANC went on a campaign, if I remember correctly. David Mabuza was the deputy leader of the ANC at the time, to make sure that people paid what they were supposed to pay for electricity. When you get right down to it, though, I just can't see any easy solution to this. And I'm not sure if the government, as it is currently constituted, would actually allow a private company to take over what is a fundamental role of local municipalities.
Yeah, so well, as you're saying, it's kind of been an ongoing issue for pretty much the whole of our democracy, where municipalities are not providing the upwards payments that they should be providing, and not just for electricity; it's also on the water side as well. And so what's seen as though, like, in my opinion, is we think that national government is bad, but when you look at the local government, it gets way worse in terms of the picture. And it's the problem is twofold. That if I'm looking at like a very high level, that on the one side, any kind of electricity theft or non-payment from the electricity users will impact the municipality's ability to pay upwards. But then also, whatever is paid to the municipality, that it's unfortunately viewed as revenue and then used on whatever expenses are accrued and whatever's paid for by the municipality, including, unfortunately, we see like massive houses being stayed in by the people that work in the upper kind of levels of municipalities, and massive, nice luxury cars from Germany being driven, and a lot of wasted expenditure that we've heard a lot about over the last decades. That then is the other side of the problem, is that the municipalities themselves have this expenditure that isn't compliant with what's meant to be done. So it's twofold, and there is going to need to be a shake-up on the local level, local government level of municipalities, almost taking away their rights to what they should be doing and giving it to private players that will do it efficiently and effectively.
Sure. I mean, there's an interesting sort of side note to all of this. The Chief Financial Officer of Eskom, Khalib Kasim, mentions that the Gauteng metros, so 3 of the big metros, used to pay on time. They don't anymore. We know Tshwane's major problems, Joburg's had major problems. I mean, if they're having major problems, everyone's going to have major problems.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate, and it seems like the city of Joburg, what they do is they go to the courts and they try and fight there and argue like nitbits of, no, we don't owe that much to Eskom, so therefore we're not going to pay anything until it's resolved by the courts. And then they sit now with 3 months being unpaid from their side, and the Eskom saying, well, we're just going to sell off the power to the whole of Joburg. And it's like almost like fire, like being fought with fire from the municipality side. And yeah, you're right, it is a trend of what's kind of come, apart from this kind of compliance that we see from the municipalities. They got up to 76% compliant with the debt relief program, but it's the positive trends in terms of now becoming compliant, but it's almost like an aspect of a bit too little too late, because it's only to then write off the debt that they have been accruing up until 2023 March, and now what happens going forward. And unfortunately, the electricity theft we keep on hearing about and the non-payments from the municipalities will result in then private players actually taking more and more of the market away from the distribution rights of the municipalities. So that's what I see going forward, not only from the generation side. We know that the independent power producers are coming on board now, and the updated amendment to the Electricity Regulation Act has been passed from the 1st of January, so now we've got a finally democratized energy sector. It's going to be both generation and distribution, and eventually we'll see transmission also coming with private players and transmission players last, but the next place to come after generation is distribution.
Matthew Cruz, thank you very much indeed. Energy expert. So much going on in electricity still. In a moment, the latest on the battle between online shopping, physical stores and shopping malls.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock, because your story matters. Absa is a registered FSP.
So I presume during the December period, you spent some time shopping, whether it was online, at a physical shop, in a shopping mall. I spent some time in one or two of the bigger malls in the Sandton area in early December, January in Rosebank as well. I don't know if I've ever seen so many people in one space outside of a sporting stadium. And yet we keep being told shopping malls are on the way out. A lot of commentary recently about the Fourways Mall. It seems to be only 2/3 full in terms of shops. It must be making, I suppose, a loss. At the same time, a Fin24 story today about Home Choice expanding their stores across the country. That's their plan for the year. They say people are more likely to buy something if they've actually seen it and touched it in a physical form. Bronwyn Williams is a trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends. Bronwyn, good evening. Good to talk to you again. So obviously internet shopping still going to grow for the foreseeable future. A lot of room for growth there. It does seem, though, that there might still be a future for physical retail stores.
Yes, I was listening to the comments and the observations that you were making just now about some of the bigger malls like Sandton and Rosebank looking fuller than ever. This is true. At the same time, of course, if you look at your periphery kind of suburban malls, you look at the North Gates and Fourways and East Gates of the world, you will notice a lot of empty spaces. And I think this is really interesting because it's very indicative of what's happening with much of our market at the moment, where the sort of retailers, just like the sort of businesses or even the sort of employees who find themselves in the sort of, as I call it, the soft underbelly of the market, the middle of the market, the average, the less aspirational, and, like you mentioned, home choice, the less cheap, that messy middle is struggling quite a lot. So technology, of course, online shopping is part of that, is pushing people to replace their sort of mid-market purchases with online purchases, which is still a very small, even like single-digit percentage of our overall retail marketplace here in South Africa. So as I said, lots of room to grow. But at the same time, on the tail ends of that bell curve, both on the really cheap and the really aspirational side of the market, we're actually seeing increases in that foot traffic. On the one side, of course, looking for that deal that you can only get from getting to the store and being in the place and standing in the queue, getting your Black Friday deal, whatever it might be. And on the other side, and also making sure you're not being scammed by some of the other sort of new entrants into the e-commerce marketplace. On the other hand, there is a status and a social status that comes from seeing and being seen in retail spaces. So you can get that taste of the luxury lifestyle, even if you are cutting your budgets back at home. So you do kind of see growth on the luxury side, the extreme luxury side, and the aspirational side, then also on the cheap side. But that middle market is and probably will be struggling for some time to come, because that's the part of the market that is trying to compete on price, can't quite compete on price, and is instead losing that market share to the easier online delivery services that give you more convenience and more efficiency, give you a little bit more than they can offer in terms of either status or value.
It's said so many times that we have too many shopping malls, and yet they still seem to be built in various places. I mean, it obviously depends on where they are, which goes to the other point you're making.
Where they are and what they're offering. We have too much retail space in South Africa. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what the statistics are now, but even pre-COVID, we had the 6th most retail space in the world. We certainly do not have the 6th biggest economy in the world, so we are quite spoiled with choice there. But the question is, do we have the right retail space that is meeting not the market that marketers think we have, but the market that we really have, which is this very fractured marketplace. We have a tiny percentage of people at the top end of the income stream looking for a special elite experience. And we have a lot of really not very affluent people in this country that are still wanting to buy things. We don't have retail stores in the right locations to serve people where they are at. We have too much retail space trying to compete for that middle of the market, which quite frankly, from a marketing and economics perspective, barely exists in our economy.
So how's this going to develop then? We're still going to see shopping malls going up in some places. I know there have been predictions from some that, all shopping is going to take place online. It doesn't look like it. It looks like for quite a long time there'll still be a space for a physical store, certainly in some markets.
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, I think the point is to be made that, yes, the share of online purchasing is going to increase. But also we need to look under the hood at those increased levels, those increased numbers with a little bit more discretion, in that a lot of those online purchases also have some sort of a physical presence, or the credibility factor, or the convenience factor, or even just having a dark store that enables online delivery to be that much more efficient. That's where your store effectively functions as a warehouse for online deliveries, as well as a shop front for those who are looking to browse or to check out specific things. So they are symbiotic, and they are in some ways complementary and not necessarily only competitive. Instead, what we're going to see is the big winners are going to embrace both the physical world and, of course, the online world, and find that happy balance there.
It's fascinating to watch how this is developing, because I think for some it also depends on the purchase. I think very few people would probably buy a car online. You want to see it.
Yes. And we see this in the luxury space too. I mean, I'm sure your listeners are quite savvy people and know that luxury has had a particularly bumpy ride over the last few months at a global level. And what we've seen in response is that luxury brands are realizing that exclusivity is baked into the luxury deal, and that an online shopping experience almost demotes your brand to the likes of your Sheins, Temus, and Amazons, right? Because there's only so much differentiation you can make on the online shopping experience where you're dealing with a fixed amount of pixels. It just can't translate into that exclusive service or lack thereof that people expect from luxury brands, right? So we've seen many luxury brands actually pulling back from online, or at least from platform online shopping experiences, and even perhaps some of their own online shopping experiences, and forcing people to engage with the full luxury experience to get the full luxury value out of their purchase. This is one of the theories around why luxury is struggling, because online kind of democratizes things, right? So it makes luxury and middle market and low market all feel very much the same. We've seen the Workins instead of the Birkins, and the rise of dupe culture and all the rest of it. How do you distinguish your luxury brand or your luxury car brand, whatever it might be, when you are competing with dupes that feel and look and are delivered the same way as your product is in the online space? Well, you differentiate that through the physical human touch. And this is a thesis that Dion and myself at Flux Trends have had for quite some time. In the early days, digitization of any industry is adopted by wealthy consumers and by the leading edge of the marketplace. But over time, digitization actually democratizes, which means it flattens. And over time, then, digital becomes for the masses, and human touch, in-person physical experiences are for the elite and for the status-seeking. Again, pointing to those signals you see of packed Sandtons and Rosebanks, and Northgate sitting with literally half its retail space boarded up in a total ghost town.
Sure. Bronwyn Williams, thank you very much indeed. Trend translator, future finance specialist at Flux Trends. Just after 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. Personal finance, starting the year off, how you should manage your money. Very important this time of year. We're on Ingram with you in about 20 minutes from now. We'll talk more about cars, and of course we'll find out what's happening on our continent as well with Dr. Rutendo Hundengwi. He, of course, is already sitting behind me, preparing to speak to you in just a few moments. You know the number, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
And Tabo, both on the line, all about shopping and online shopping. And good evening, you first. You're from Sandton tonight. Shopping online, going to a shopping mall, which do you prefer?
Oh, good evening, Stephen. Yes, there's no comparison. I moved into my new home a year ago, and I needed a lot of things, curtains, etc., etc. And I have had the most incredible service from Temu. You can't even compare it to me trawling a mall where, the smells, the loud shouting, nobody speaks to each other, they scream. There's no such thing as politeness. They push past you. It's a terrible experience. And from what I have gained is a really good service where I've been able to shop, at my convenience, looking at what I need. Yes, you do have to know what you want. But whatever hasn't been suitable for me, I've sent back. They collect it. They refund. And you can order again.
Sure. All right, Anne from Sandton, thank you. Very happy with the online experience. Tabo, you're on the line from Tshwane tonight. Good evening. What have you found about shopping in shopping malls?
It's so ironic that you're talking about this, because that is my biggest nightmare of this December. I actually took a trip down to mainland after a long time not being there. Last time I checked past, but it wasn't that long. Observations not done. But my experience was in preparation to the World Cup, when I was involved with the strategic LOC local organizing committee on preparation to the World Cup. And we went there with Grime, and mainland was still under, Old Mutual. Yeah. It was still run under Old Mutual. There was a center manager there called Mr. Grime. And the security guy, I think it was Ferreira or something, we call him Pandlani. I call him Pandlani, the old man. You know, that mall was best run. I'm telling you, it was best run by Mr. Crime. And when Pareto came in, you know, I thought probably because they made the mall to be huge and everything, they will be more responsible and everything like that. And believe you me, it leaves much to be desired. What your question is online shopping and going to the shopping mall. I would prefer not to go to mainland to do online shopping than to go to the shopping mall. And these is a pain in me saying this, because normally in December we take out kids to go to do shopping. When we do shopping after that for entertainment, experience and everything like that. You know, mainland has turned from being a family mall to being something else. You know, with the clubs that are there, you have half-naked kids that are like, not kids, they're teenagers that are going to the clubs in the evening, and you start to ask yourself, what is going on with the new Pareto? What is going on with them? And we are actually, I'm urging them, if you guys cannot manage mainland is our pride in Swan. Please take it back to Old Mutual. It was better run under them, and it was so expensive for them, for the parking, 15 rand. Imagine, extra with 5 rand. Imagine, this December. Enough reason for me not to do shopping there, to do online. But my love for my city, I cannot leave this unattended. And believe you me, I'm going to write them an email. They must definitely do something, because definitely the manager who's there is not doing enough.
All right, Thabo, thank you
so much.
No, thank you, Thabo. I can hear your passion about this. I mean, it's interesting how a shopping mall can change. Sometimes they don't change for a very long time, but often they sort of change character over time, and Thabo's sort of pointing to that. I don't know if it's deliberate strategy. Maybe they want to appeal to a different market. It can happen. But it also shows you how important shopping centres are to a community. You know, it's your place. It's where you feel comfortable. Often go and find the sort of local shopping centre, and you move to a place. I haven't moved for ages and ages now, but it's an important thing. And I think you hear that with Thabo, don't you? Anyway, your views, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, the debate around the world about the pace at which different places are adopting hybrid and electric vehicles seems to be ebbing and flowing at the moment. There was a time when there seemed to be a headline rush into hybrid cars, into electric cars. Governments were planning to ban the sale of petrol or diesel cars by 2030, 2035. Several of them have pulled back from that. There was a report in MoneyWeb suggesting that car makers here are now trying to increase the number of charging stations on major routes. And if you don't have charging stations, no one's going to drive an electric car. It was written by Roy Cockayne. He's a contributor to MoneyWeb. Roy, good evening to you. I don't think we've spoken to each other before, but I know your byline very well. It did seem that this plan to create these charging stations almost lost momentum. Do we know why we don't have as many charging stations as the car industry is going to need?
Good evening, Stephen. Yes, I spoke to Michael Mabasa, who's the CEO of NAMSA, the Automotive Business Council, yesterday in preparing to write that article. And he referred to South Africa's economic problems and the economic slowdown, and also the need to actually to bring in black-owned companies to participate in the tender, and also the rollout of these charging stations, which he said would be in line with NAMSA's transformation agenda. Those were the reasons that he provided.
I mean, car makers have a huge amount resting on this. Their entire model basically needs drivers to believe and to know that charging stations will be wherever they need them. I mean, there's a reason why there's so many petrol stations or fuel stations around. We don't need as many as that. But without the network, nothing's going to shift in terms of the cars we buy.
That's very true, because there's one of the main issues that the automotive industry has had to deal with has been range anxiety. In other words, the distance that you can drive in a fully electric vehicle, but new energy vehicles comprise electric, fully electric, and plug-in hybrids and other traditional hybrids before you actually run out of electricity to go any further. And they obviously don't want to get stranded because that can be particularly dangerous in South Africa. So the need for charging stations is vital to drive sales. But if you do look at the sales of new energy vehicles in South Africa, the transformation has already begun. I just extracted some data on new energy vehicle sales. They increased, obviously off a very low base, by more than 421% year on year, from 896 units in 2021 to 4,674 units in 2022, and by more than 65% in 2023 again, although they still remain negligible as a percentage of total new vehicle sales. The latest figures for last year haven't been released yet, so we don't know what those are, but that is indicative that there is some appetite, and that's despite the fact that that new energy vehicles are a lot more expensive than normal sort of petrol engines.
It would seem to me, sorry, Roy, there must be a strong financial case for someone, I think there is one group that's doing it, to basically make sure there's a national network of these stations, because you would get the money back through revenue. I mean, you would run them like fuel stations run them, and yes, getting the electricity to the place might be difficult. You might be able to do it in some renewable way, but there must be a long-term financial case for doing it.
I'd agree with you, but, somebody ultimately has to pay, and even in Europe, the pace at which new energy vehicles have been adopted by motorists has been slower than anticipated, which has led to some countries suggesting that the banning of internal combustion engine vehicles should be delayed. The ban is set to be a ban from 2035. It's not certain whether that is going to be extended or not, but that is part of the discussion and debate that is going on now. So, I don't think that there's going to be any company that would want to actually invest in that now, because they don't know when they're going to get a return. Obviously, the automotive industry itself has got a vested interest, because they have got to move in this new direction. And so they're putting their money where their mouth is. And one would assume that possibly in some time in the future that they would sell that off to some operators or whatever. I don't know. I haven't actually discussed that with what their plan would be. But the industry is, the industry would, in some countries, the government would obviously provide the funding for that, but obviously that's not possible in South Africa because the South African government is so cash-strapped.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Roy Cockaine, a contributor to MoneyWeb.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
On the next Money Show, this week's shapeshifter, Jack Helfon, founder, CEO at Atlas Finance, sharing life lessons and the success story behind building his business empire, plus Business Unusual, Sipiwe Moyo, the organizational behavior specialist. Then your consumer ninja, Wendy Nola, in your corner, fighting for your consumer rights. Also, all your top business news of the day.
The Money Show.
The Africa Business Report.
Dr. Rotendo Ndwingwi, the founding director of Tribe Africa Advisory, author of Rumble in the Jungle, joins us now. Rotendo, good evening. Happy New Year, if I may say. Nice to see you again.
Happy New Year, Stephen. Always glad to see you on this day of the week.
We've been talking about fuel. We've been talking about filling stations. In Tanzania, their fuel revolution has been slowed down by a lack of filling stations. Completely the opposite problem to what we have.
That's the exciting thing about Africa. I always highlight, for you to grasp the opportunities in Africa is to embrace the heterogeneity as opposed to the homogeneity of problems. And this is one talking point, Stephen. Tanzania, believe it or not, just to go into the story with regards to compressed natural gas, their deposits of CNG is estimated to be about 57 trillion cubic feet, which I tried to translate that to meters, and I just went backwards. My head was spinning. But what they're doing now, because they've got the deposit, they're using this CNG to actually drive motor vehicles, and they started off with small motor vehicles. And just to give you an indication, $6 will buy you 11 kgs of CNG, which can take you 180 kilometers, which is quite a huge impact. If you translate that to rand, that's about 120 rand.
That's a good deal.
That's a very good deal. The other great story is that it's 40% cheaper. The outlets that are actually supplying the CNG in Tanzania, and this is why it's also a great story, is an Egyptian company called Tapa Abrika. And I think in one of the previous sessions, Stephen, I also highlighted how Tanzania has got quite a good relationship with a lot of the northeastern African countries like Libya, Egypt, with regards to power. So it's an exciting story because it talks to industrialization, developing the continent, and it's a local story. Obviously, they use multinational skills. The downside, though, I think they've only got 4 outlets at the moment. So it goes down to, you've got these innovative ideas, but it all boils down to infrastructure. So the sustainability and growth of this is obviously depend on that growing. But the company is working with the Tanzania Power Development Corporation with regards to opening up more outlets. But for me, I think the exciting part is that Tanzania has got this great access of clean energy, because you know that CNG is clean energy. It lasts longer, it's cheaper, they're using local resources and addressing a big problem in Africa, which is power, energy, clean energy, health, etc., etc. So it will be good to see how this expands on the continent. And they're actually now looking at other countries. And I think some of the countries that are in the pipeline of embracing this are South Africa, Kenya, I think Nigeria, the big culprits with regards to investing in such good ideas. And overall, the 57 trillion cubic feet of deposits are potentially attracting $30 billion of FDI. Sure. So I look forward to following up on this story in future in future talks.
And then Africa's improved food targets. They're looking at commercial food production, and we know, in many parts of the world, commercial food production really feeds the nation.
Yeah, so Africa Improved Food is a company, AIF. I hope you saw how smart I was there, how I abbreviated Africa Improved Food Production. But an interesting story. So the company itself is based in Rwanda. Rwanda has got 7% of the shareholding. The other major shareholders are the IFC and also the FMO, which is part of a multilateral world organization. And basically, what has happened is that in the past, the reason for this company existing was to supply food for disaster areas, South Sudan, Uganda, Nigeria. Each of those are different disaster stories in one way or the other. But it's no longer become viable because one of the main reasons is that the food and the agricultural source of food was produced in Africa. It was sent all the way to Belgium, and it was processed in Belgium, packaged in Belgium, then brought back to Africa, and they sent to the disaster. And they looked at, when you look at the numbers, they said you're probably estimating about, out of that whole process, only 5% of what was produced and manufactured was going to the commercial sector. The rest was actually going into the, whether it was Catholic Relief Services or Red Cross, those are the main customers. So to cut a long story short, it wasn't viable. They are now turning the model on its head. The company said for us to be viable, we have to go 70% commercial. And for us to go 70% commercial, we actually have to manufacture more in Africa. And that's a big step. And they're targeting to supply countries like, I think Ethiopia is on the pipeline, Ghana, and to expand their market in the African space. So I think one of the key highlights here is that you've got multilateral organizations, global players, seeing a need of food, which in Africa is a big thing, in addressing shortages and disaster areas, but more importantly, bringing the level of beneficiation into the African market. But in order to do that, they need about $260 million. 50% of that they are seeking through equity, the other one through debt financing. But at the moment, they've probably got about $30 million US. For me, an investment like this, for any big player wanting to see solutions in the African market and get a return on investment, and looking at the players that are already involved, like the IFC, the World Bank, I think it's a great opportunity. But it's another story of the translation of an NGO dependency syndrome to a commercialized, self-sustainable solution going to the future with a positive impact on the African continent.
Very interesting to watch. China's top diplomats heading to our continent. That's as the attention we get from the West is dwindling. I find this fascinating. I mean, like, Britain's influence in Africa has just disappeared over the last 30 years, and the US is not really that interested.
Yeah, I wonder why. I think with the new leadership coming on board, there'll be a change. But
that's
a discussion.
Okay, you can think that if you like.
But on a more serious note, it talks to the geopolitics and the geoeconomics, and I think we're going to see a lot of this happening in the coming year. Obviously, President Trump is coming onto the helm of the U.S. leadership, and what that will entail, as we already have seen. I know I'm going really, really west now, and I'll bring it home now. But recently, we've seen what's happening in Canada with the Prime Minister of Canada stepping down because of certain threats around tariffs that President Trump said in a jokingly or non-jokingly way, and he's now resigned, and the rest is history. Coming back into the African context, I mean, we've always been a battleground for the West and the East, and China is sending one of its most high-powered diplomats, which is the Foreign Minister Wang Yi. I hope I say that properly, and he's coming to Africa to specifically, obviously, bring the agenda of infrastructure and development and loans to the African continent. But I think what stuck out for me was the specific countries he's going through, and you can see it's quite strategic. He's going to Namibia, which is Southern Africa. He's going to Chad, which is the Sahel region to a certain extent. He's going to the Republic of Congo, and not DRC, but the Republic of Congo. And then he's also going to Nigeria, which is a powerhouse. And their mandate is that saying, I think they're positioning themselves to say that irrespective of what happens with the decision-making in Trump 2.0, from an Africa perspective, there's a huge opportunity for China. And I think it just positions us as Africa to say, where do we stand and what do we want to achieve? So it'll be actually interesting to the specific discussions that come out, because each of those countries have got a specific agenda that they want to achieve and how that they can capitalize on that. So it'll be another interesting story to watch in the coming days.
And then the tobacco company PMI, that's Peter Morris International, I think, they're looking at cheaper smoke-free products in Africa. And a reminder, of course, that as the World Health Organization says, smoking kills. They're also not wild about smoke-free products either. They want cheaper products here. All that means is that more children will use them.
More children, yes. So Philip Morris is actually probably the biggest tobacco manufacturing company in the world. It's a U.S. multinational. And, as I was going through, I mean, one of the big markets they actually see for them for growth is the African market. And to actually scare you, I actually said holy smoke. And I hope Trevor Noah heard that, so maybe he can use my joke. When I had the actual statistic from 2000 to 2025, the growth in smokers in Africa will increase from 52 million to 85 million people. Sure. That's a 63% growth in people who smoke. The total smoking population in the world, they estimate at the moment, is 1.3 billion. And if you follow statistics, less people are dropping smoking than actually catching on. But to come to the actual, and unfortunately it is the business side of smoking, Philip Morrison is looking at providing a smoke-free cigarettes. So in other words, they don't have a carbon footprint, but obviously they don't say much in terms of the health implications that are there. In the last sort of 10 years, they've probably invested about $12.5 billion in terms of R&D, in terms of developing this. And I'm not a smoker, so I'm not going to judge those who smoke. But I think the scary reality is that there's a lot of money there in something that is so controversial. But the reality is they see Africa as a huge opportunity, because one of the good things that Africa has done, and you see it in South Africa, you probably see it in Nigeria, most of the leading economies, is that they've actually restricted smoking in public areas. So if you're able to come up with a smoke that produces no smoke, then that's a good thing. But then there's the whole e-cigarette, there's the whole vape story and the consequences of the. But to cut a long story short, at the end of the day, they're seeing it from a from a growth perspective, a huge opportunity. The demand is there. And if they come up with the right product, they see it growing on the African market. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out with oncoming regulatory frameworks that are dealing with that.
The demand's only there because of the addiction they create.
They do.
You can see which side of the fence I am on this. Rotendo, nice to see you. Thanks very much
Always
indeed.
a pleasure, Stephen.
Dr. Rotendo Hundringui, Founding Director at Tribe Africa Advisory, updating you on some of the business opportunities on our continent. Just gone 7:30.
Thanks so much, Stephen. It's great to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to a cracking 2025.
Let's hope it's financially successful. You make the point that you've got to start on the right footing. You've got to set the tone for the year. And a big part of that, of course, is setting goals. How important is setting goals?
Well, often when you speak to people about their money at the start of the year, you get a sense of hopelessness about their finances. They're, as you say, a lot of people call it January, and they're afraid and kind of starting a year on a bad cycle where they're concerned about debt, or they're concerned about having no money, and it's the beginning of a year, and to me that's not the best way for us to get ourselves going. And I always think, if we rely on kind of drifting from month to month, year to year, then what you have to know is you're not going to end up where you want to be with your finances and potentially with the retirement or financial freedom goals that you're aspiring to. If you don't set a goal, how on earth are you going to go anywhere? And I think that's maybe the first point for the year is just sit down and spend a bit of time quietly setting some goals for yourself. And I'm not saying that they have to be massive goals. If you're 35 years old, I'm not saying, set the goal to say, I'm going to retire by 55. If that's what you want to do, great. But why not set some smaller milestones, slightly more achievable things that you can get done in a 6-month or 12-month period, and put them down, put them into action. I think for me, a lot of the time when you speak to people that are struggling with their money, they don't really have a plan. They don't really have a goal. They're just drifting from month to month, from paycheck to paycheck, and stressing about bills without ever really taking control. And for me, step one for control is set some goals.
You talk about setting goals. I mean, it can be quite simple, I suppose. It could be sorting out your emergency fund, things like that.
It has to be simple, Stephen. It's what I do every day, and it can't be complex. Otherwise, they'd call it rocket science. So I think I think doing very basic things to take control. One of them is life is going to happen. There will be something in a 12-month period that will attempt to derail your finances, whether it's the geyser bursting at home and you need to pay the excess on your insurance, it's a little fender bender and you need to pay the excess on that insurance, or an unexpected medical bill that doesn't get covered by medical aid, or whatever it is. There will be an expense that you can't plan for and that you can't prepare for. And if you want to be sure of some control, then set up your emergency fund. Just as a reminder, I think the ideal number is somewhere around 3 months worth of your expenses to a maximum of 6 months worth of your expenses. So if you're spending 10,000 a month, then 30,000 a month to 30,000 to 60,000 is a good amount for an emergency fund, because by then, if you've got that amount of money set aside and something big happens, at least you can get going for a few months with your emergency fund while you make a plan. Most people, if they don't have an emergency fund, what they're doing is they're going into some form of debt, and it's usually incredibly expensive debt, something like a credit card or a personal loan or an overdraft or even a loan shark, and that's not going to help you get to financial freedom. So it can be really simple, build your emergency fund. If you do that in the next few months, that gives you massive control and makes you kind of immune from what will happen in life. And it's amazing, Stephen, how often, if you have the emergency fund, the emergency doesn't arise, but when you don't have the emergency fund, it arises the next day.
Isn't that always the case? Part of it is also, of course, about budgeting, and this is a really good time. It may not be very busy at work, for example, to spend some time budgeting. Where do you start? How do you do it?
I think first, I always when I speak to an audience, I can see people's eyes rolling backwards, and kind of starting the yawns when I say let's talk about budgeting. So I just want to address that. It doesn't mean that there is no fun and there is no return on life or enjoyment when you set up a budget. In fact, that might be the first thing that you put down in your budget is I want to spend a certain amount of money every month on things that are fun and meaningful to me. And that's great. By all means, do that. I think, once you plan for them, it gives you the freedom to spend that money that you've set aside on those things. And you can set it up in a way that it becomes some form of a reward for doing the other things, which are a bit harder. So I think, budgeting shouldn't be a swear word, and it shouldn't be something that's boring for people. It should be something that allows you some form of excitement. And so to me, start the year by looking at what you've spent over the last 3 months. Most of us nowadays, we spend on our phones or tap and go, so it's pretty easy to get a good idea of what's happened in your finances and your expenses over a 3-month period. And I think the last 3 months is a very good indication, because December will probably be a bit more expensive than normal. If you've been on holiday, you've probably spent a bit more. November, maybe not so much, and October might have been the month that you were trying to prepare for December, so you might have underspent a bit. So look at what you spent over that 3-month period and then get to an average. So again, if you spent 15,000 in December and you spent 10 in November and 8 in October, add them all together, divide by 3, and that becomes your average monthly expenses, and then see how you divvy that up. How did it actually work? Where did the money go? And that should be the basis for your budget going forward. And I think importantly here, don't set a budget that's unrealistic. In other words, don't say, well, I normally spend 20,000 a month, and that's ridiculous. I'm only going to budget to spend 15,000 next month, because that's not going to happen. You are going to spend close to what you spend on an average month. So maybe create the space to say, well, I need to save a little bit of money. So I'm going to, if I spend 20 normally, I'm going to aim to spend 19,500 and set aside the 500 for my emergency fund. Do it simply and do it basically.
One of the things, of course, is trying to make sure that you put money aside. Are there easy ways to do that?
Yeah, I think we don't. We're not disciplined as human beings. If we were, we'd all be marathon runners and eating incredibly healthy. But that's not the reality when we look around at ourselves and our friends and our peers around the country and the world. So there are things that you can do to instill some discipline that don't take much work. And one of them is this thing of an automatic debit order. At the start of a month, when if you get paid on the 25th, try and set up some debit orders on your accounts, the next day that run off your account immediately, so that you allocate some money to your savings. For example, if you need to bulk up your retirement fund and you need to get your fund going and your emergency fund, then potentially take some money for each of those and run a debit order from your bank account the day after payday into each of those goals, so that you're not required by month end, when there's no money left, to try and find a way to fill those financial goals. Happens automatically, and then that once they're off your account, whatever's left is there to pay the bills and potentially to be spent, because you've taken care of the goals automatically. And I think there's a bit of friction involved here. Once we set up an automatic debit order, it creates a bit of work for us to go and undo that. So often what happens is we become a little bit more disciplined by default, because it just takes too much work and too much effort to undo that. And I like that idea. I like making it hard to stop saving.
I mean, I suppose, I like the idea of friction, because it really maximizes the utility of our laziness, to use a complicated phrase. It basically makes a virtue of us being lazy. You make it hard for yourself to stop saving, in other words.
Yeah, the part of achieving financial freedom is an element of honesty with yourself. It doesn't matter what you tell the world. It really matters what you tell yourself. And if you know that you're a little bit lazy and you're not going to be disciplined in taking the extra money every month and setting it into your investments, then create this difficulty, this friction, where it becomes harder to undo your good habits and hard to spend the money on your bad habits, which maybe also leads to another another point on this, which is if it's easy for people to spend on a credit card, and on their phone, and that it's easy to go into debt, one of the things you should really be considering is reducing your credit limits on your credit cards, your overdrafts, all of those things. Nowadays, with fraud, so prevalent around the world, it makes a lot of sense to have a very small credit limit anyway, because if something goes wrong and you get hacked or you get defrauded, at least the damage won't be so big. But secondly, if you're not disciplined with your credit card, then having a very small credit limit means that you're not going to get yourself into so much trouble every month, because you've set in a limit, and again, becomes hard to change that limit. So I think those are simple things we can do to look after ourselves. And maybe just to stay on the point of debt for a second, if you are sitting with major credit card or personal loan or overdraft debt now, then some of the fun money that you might be wanting to set aside, you might need to just defer a little bit for a time and get that credit card down to zero as fast as you possibly can, because credit card debt, unfortunately, compounds against you faster than almost anything else, and that's the thing you need to get out of your life as fast as you possibly can.
I suppose all short-term debt you want to get rid of, and this is a good moment to do it.
Exactly, and face the reality. Don't ignore it, and don't avoid the banking app or the bank statements when you get them. Stare at that problem in the face, understand it, and one of your goals might be, I'm going to take control of this. I'm not going to be dictated to by my debt provider. I'm going to take control, and even if there is not that much money in your budget, allocate a little bit extra into getting those debts down. And I think that sense of achievement, when you look at your statement every month and you say, well, I've knocked 10% off my debt, and you do that month after month, at some point the debt goes away, and that sense of accomplishment and achievement and pride is really valuable in helping you set new goals with a lot more confidence. So please don't ignore this stuff. It compounds against you really quickly, and no one forgets when you owe them money. They will always remember, and institutions will chase you forever. So take control and get rid of it.
We're speaking to Warren Ingram, the co-founder of Galileo Capital, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Your questions for him at the beginning of January. The other thing you need to do at this time, of course, Warren, is have a look at your investments. You need to make sure that the money you have put away has been invested wisely.
Yeah, I think especially when we've been through a period of time where investments haven't done too badly. The last 2 or 3 years, especially in the US stock market, have been extremely productive for a lot of investors. Even the JSE hasn't done too badly over the last couple of years. It's been quite rewarding. And so the temptation might be just to leave everything as it is, because why would you break something that's not broken? And that's not necessarily the best idea with investments. Unfortunately, when we look at the world of investing, the things that did incredibly well over the last year or two are not necessarily going to be the things that will do incredibly well over the next 3 or 4 years. And the reason for that is valuations. When you're buying a share like Nvidia, which is kind of the most hyped share around, because its chips are going to drive the artificial intelligence boom of the world, it might do that. But what we have to know is that the valuation of Nvidia, in other words, the price earnings ratio, is much more than 50 at the moment. That means 50 years of current profits to pay for the current price. That's an enormously expensive business. Now, it might do incredibly well for the next year or two, that share price, but it's extremely rare for a company that's so expensive to deliver great returns for the next 5 or 10 years. It might happen, but it requires a lot of luck. And so it's important to look at your portfolio of investments to say, perhaps it's time for me to make sure that I've got correct diversification. Have I got too much invested in American tech shares? Shouldn't I have a bit more in emerging markets? Shouldn't I have a bit more spread to bonds, etc.? So just make sure that the balance of your portfolio is correct, and then look at the spread between your local and global investments as well. If the rand is likely to go stronger, might find local investments doing well, and so make sure that you've got the ideal balance between what you've got in South Africa and overseas, and don't be disappointed then, if you've got the balance wrong and the JSE and the rand do incredibly well over the next 5 years. That's a possibility. It's not a forecast, but it's a possibility. And the only way you benefit from that is proper diversification and a proper balance of your investments. And my last point on this, Stephen, is you have to stay calm when things get scary. There is every likelihood when you've got, President Donald Trump from sometime this month, and whatever is going to go on with conflicts around the world, potentially, interest rates not coming down so quickly in the US, that the news headlines will be frightening. And that's not the time to panic. You need to get your strategy right now, need to make sure the diversification is okay. And then when things do get rocky and do get bumpy, don't panic, because that provides the opportunities for you to buy the assets that other people are selling at a huge discount.
I suppose this takes us to another question. Is there ever a moment at which you do need to panic? And I'm reminded of what happened at the start of the pandemic. Some people panicked, lost a huge amount of money, and then markets rebounded really quite quickly. And if you didn't, and if that was the wrong time to panic, then it's never time to panic. But it can't really be the case that it's never time to panic.
I think the times that I can recall where it was worth a little bit of sensible panic was, for example, when the big Steinhoff story broke, when the big African bank story broke, going way back when a share called Enron, the news broke in the States. When an individual company that's been a star performer starts to hit the wall in a big way, and I'm not just talking about missing a profit forecast. Lots of companies won't achieve a profit forecast, but when you start to see real warning signs that there might be fraud, that their business case might be collapsing, that's the time for me to be a quick seller and don't be tempted to buy in again. I think I can't tell you how many phone calls I received from people once Steinhoff had halved in price to say, isn't the time now right to buy into that share again? And of course, the value went to zero. So I think when you own an individual company and reliable media starts to tell you that there are real problems there, real kind of end of business potential problems, that's a time to sell. And I don't think that's necessarily panic. I think it's probably sensible, rational response. But for example, when you look at a country, would you sell out of a country? Well, I mean, there might be a time if you think that there's going to, if you were Ukrainian and you knew that the tanks in Russia were kind of massing on your border, that might be a time to sell an entire country. But I think very rarely are there other situations where it's time to panic. I think, in a big market crash, by the time you know that it's all happening, it's actually already happened.
Yeah.
And then the best thing to do is to sit it out.
We're speaking to Warren Ingram, Personal Finance Tonight, co-founder of Galileo Capital. Good to hear from you as well.
The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Warren, of course, co-founder of Galileo Capital. On that point about sort of global sort of geopolitical risk at the moment, Warren, we had a question from Katlejo, who sent us this question saying, I'm so worried about Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the booming artificial intelligence sector. I think there's a good chance the US tech sector is going to implode this year. How can I protect my investments from harm? I think when you look at the huge run that it's had, it's a legitimate question. I know plenty of people who will tell us that this run's still got a long way to go yet. But how do you protect investments in this situation?
I think you need to approach something like this with a huge element of humility, and the humility involved here is to say to yourself and to your money particularly that you can't forecast, you can't predict the outcome of what's going to happen over the next 6 months or 12 months. When we look at the articles being written by respected people trying to analyze Donald Trump, the summary, I think, of all of those articles is no one actually knows what he's going to do. No one actually knows what he's going to deliver and what he's going to bank on the promises that he made and what he's not going to bank. So I think if you want to be in the game of forecasting what politicians and wacky billionaires are going to do, I think you need to know you're probably going to lose money more often than you will make money. And then with something like the whole view on AI, it feels to me very similar to what happened in the late 1990s, where we all saw the power of the internet and how it could change the way business was done. The reality is that the companies that made real money out of it, from an investment perspective, were only really productive for investors about a decade later. And so the early, forerunners actually didn't generate a huge amount of profit for investors, and many of them went bang. So my answer to Katlego in a situation like this is practice some sensible diversification. I mean, I'm not sure that the shares that are exposed to AI, will stop growing this year. They might well continue to boom for another day or another year. I have really no clear view at all. But what you should do is, if those shares have suddenly become 20 or 30% of your overall portfolio, you need to know you're overexposed to a sector which is phenomenally expensive. And then don't be afraid of taking some profits off the table, allocating those profits elsewhere to other investments that are very cheap. And then you, by all means, keep some money allocated to those. I mean, if that sector continues to do well for investors for another 2 or 3 years, it will be nice and rewarding for you to have a portion, but always be sure that you've got a sensible allocation to a bunch of different sectors. And when we're looking at Trump, to a bunch of different geographies. We don't know what Trump's going to do for the US or for the globe. He might unsettle everybody and everything, and in which case, we might be in a major crash. I'm not convinced of that argument, but equally, I'm not convinced of the argument that he's going to be phenomenally helpful to all investors everywhere. I don't see that either. So I think just be very careful of the forecasts, be very careful of the scary headlines, because very often what politicians and big businessmen say that they're going to do and what they actually do are very different. Just don't forget, I'm going to build the wall and I'm going to make Mexico pay for it. Well, that didn't happen. So we don't know what's going to happen. So spread your investments and then stay calm.
We've got a minute and a half left, Warren. We heard commentary yesterday from people in the cryptocurrency industry, and this is a sort of Trump question. They want pension regulations, I think it's called Regulation 28 from our National Treasury, to change to allow South African pension funds to invest in cryptocurrencies. I presume you're not a fan of that idea.
I think someone made an observation the other day to say that Bitcoin's most enduring strength is that it just won't die after a very long period of time, and so it's faced a lot of headwinds, and it's come out the other side. Do I think that it's going to be the thing that will make all pensioners incredibly wealthy? No. Allocating 1% of a pension fund to Bitcoin at the right time and at the right price might be some form of risk management, maybe, but I don't think it's going to be the thing that will generate dividends and income for retirees and people building their wealth. So I'm not a big fan, but if they do it, they need to do it with an incredibly small amount of money.
Warren Ingram, thank you very much indeed. Always good to hear from you. Co-founder of Galileo Capital, and of course bringing you personal finance at the beginning of January.